Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Union Society. Welcome to Michaelmas 2012. It is my pleasure as the Michaelmas 2012 president to welcome you here this term. I'm Austin. Standing here with me are Matej and Anna, two officers on the committee. And before we begin the debate, we just have a few words from June, who is an officer on CUFIC, Cambridge University Finance and Investment Club, I believe? Yes. We don't do this at every debate. However, in order to keep membership prices as far down as possible, we look for sponsorship from various external sources. So the Cambridge University Finance and Investment Club are sponsoring tonight's debate and helping the union sort of get through things. So just a few quick words from June, and then I will introduce the debate and hand over to our speakers tonight.
Thank you, Austin. I must admit that these are not going to be few words. I have a speech written. I'm afraid it's a little bit political, and as you see, we come from Finance Investment Club, so you'll see where we stand before we even start. Well, I would first like to thank the Union President Austin and also the Union Treasurer Casey for reaching out to us and letting us sponsor the debate. Capitalism, whether we like it or hate it, is the reality. So I congratulate the audience for coming tonight to debate it. In essence, capitalism has proved to be efficient in the creation of wealth, but less so in its distribution. However, capitalism is not so much the best system as the most repairable and the most flexible system that we have found. It has the most numerous and most non-revolutionary mechanisms by which change can be enacted. Consumer power and ethical investors, for example, can all influence capitalist decisions. There is, of course, no denying the problems of capitalism, but we must also observe that these problems originate from the same source as any other human social system, and that is inherent human nature. Greed, selfishness, and ignorance merely manifest themselves in different ways under different systems. Under capitalism, it is increasing material inequality. Under communism, it is political oppression by the bureaucratic elites. Now, that is precisely why any brilliant idea of a new social order is flawed. It will simply corrupt under the same human nature. Moreover, it will likely corrupt faster and deeper than capitalism. But we at CUFIC are not so much arguing for capitalism as trying to inspire people to take advantage of its potential adaptability. We firmly believe in the power of individual action by the educated elites in this very room. Instead of dreaming of an abstract justice or criticizing others for weaknesses that we all share, we must strive to correct the tangible injustice of our reality. And to do that, we must enter into the heart of the system, work extremely hard, and attempt to climb higher to a socio-economic position from where we can enact change and to lead by example. It is a tough and less trodden path, but that does not mean that it's the wrong path. Of course, power and ambition are corruptive forces, and in order to climb high, we cannot afford to be saints. But that is not an excuse to give up all attempts and to lose faith in humanity. In history, you'll find many examples of Cambridge graduates improving their contemporary system without dismantling it. William Wilberforce, for example, outlawed slavery without dismantling the British Empire. In fact, he strengthened it by adding greater moral fiber. Of course, we cannot all become William Wilberforce or Bill Gates, but perhaps if we work together, we give ourselves a small but genuine chance. If you sincerely would like to see change within multinational corporations, you must build yourself the best corporate career possible, or at least learn about them from the inside. If you agree, please join CUFIC by coming to our launch next Tuesday. QFIC is the most successful professional society at Cambridge, and we shall strive to provide you with the best starting point for your career. But Mahatma Gandhi once said, our greatness lies not so much in making great changes to society as in being able to remake ourselves. He means that before we aspire to make major changes to society, we must all...
Are you really telling me you've got your plush nine grand for 3 months internship at a bank because you want to help other people?
I thank you for the point, but let's wrap this up so we can go into the debate.
Well, in fact, I haven't done an internship yet, so I cannot... We'll see. I'll answer that question once I've done my military service and got a job, and we can discuss. It is not the question of how much change we can enact. It is a question of our individual attitude to life. Right. Well, thank you for listening to my political speech. I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, June. And thank you to Kufik again for sponsoring tonight's debate. To quote Mahatma Gandhi as well, no man can be considered great until his death, and no society can be considered great until tested. On that note, actually, I see a lot of new faces tonight, and I want to welcome all the new freshers here to the Union. I hope you enjoy tonight's debate, and I hope, if you haven't already joined, that you consider doing so. Membership does go up tonight. But to quickly run over the rules of the debate, it's very similar to the one that you've just seen, very similar to the emergency debate. We're going to have slightly longer speeches from each side. We have 6 speakers instead of 4. They will have 8 to 10 minutes to speak, and should they choose, up to 2 minutes to respond to the other side's speech. Now, when a speaker is speaking, you're more than welcome to stand up and shout point of information, or on that point, if you'd like to interrupt them and ask them a question. I do think this is on, which is going to get me to my next point. But yes, you're welcome to interrupt them and ask them a question. It is up to the speaker to take your question or not. So please do wait for the speaker to tell you to go ahead or to indicate that he or she would like to sort of hear your point. If they don't, it is, after all, their time. Please do sit down and respect the speaker's time limit. After the first 4 speakers, we'll have the opportunity for members of the audience, yourselves, to stand up and make very short points in proposition, opposition, and abstention of the motion, which will be responded to by the speakers. On that note, I want to encourage people, no matter what your experience is, no matter whether or not you've spoken in such a forum before, no matter what your economics experience is or what have you, all views are welcome here, all perspectives are welcome, and we are very careful to make sure everyone does feel welcome. So please, we will not accept any offensive points, but we do hope that if you have anything you'd like to say, that you feel comfortable saying it. If you do speak from the floor, we ask that you speak into a microphone. Even if you are very good at projecting, there are a few hundred people in other rooms in this building who didn't manage to get into the chamber, unfortunately, and if you don't speak into a microphone, they cannot hear you, and you will make their night very sad. So please, please do wait for a microphone to get to you. There's several of these that will go around. Speak into the microphone, and other people will be able to hear you. Also, and this is my final point before I begin the debate, if you do speak, please introduce yourself with your name and college clearly so that everyone can hear, and Alex, the Vice President, can take that down in the minutes book. Anyway, on that note, I'd like to begin tonight's debate on the motion this House believes that capitalism has failed. Our first speaker tonight is Andrew Kliman, a professor from America and author of, forgive me here, Failure of the Capitalist Production, which is a study of the causes of the recession. Andrew, if you'd like to begin.
I'd like to begin by thanking the Society for inviting me to debate this very important issue and give a shout out to my students in my economics crisis class who will be watching this on YouTube. The Oxford Union recently considered the motion, "This House believes that capitalism has failed the poor." Tonight, a very different question is before you. Has capitalism failed? It's a difference between a transitive verb and an intransitive verb. Some of us think that capitalism regularly fails the poor and most people in the world. But that doesn't mean that capitalism has failed. If a person or social system doesn't try to accomplish something, it can't really have said to be failed to achieve it. John Stuart Mill said that it was doubtful whether new technology had ever lightened the day's toil of any human being. In response, Karl Marx suggested that this was not a failure of capitalism. Firms that adopt new technology aren't trying to lighten the workers' toil. To fail, you have to have tried. Okay. Now, in contrast to the technology example, I think that the Great Recession and the ongoing economic malaise are an enormous failure of capitalism. The system isn't only failing us, it's failing on its own terms. It's been almost 5 years since the recession began, and capitalism has failed to rebound substantially. It's still failing to do so, and no one knows when things are going to turn around. I want to focus on this economic crisis because of its obvious importance, but even more because this is why we're even having this debate. Whether capitalism has failed wasn't debated 5 years ago. It's not hard to imagine a debate back then on whether capitalism has failed the poor, but it is hard to imagine a debate 5 years ago on whether capitalism itself has failed. So I think that this is the issue we have to address. John Maynard Keynes wrote that the ideas of economists and political philosophers are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Apropos of this, I think the chief failure of capitalism is its failure to win the battle of ideas. Ever since the economic crisis erupted, capitalism is no longer being taken for granted. It's just the way things are. Its foundations are being seriously called into question. The most recent example, the question of whether capitalism has failed is being debated publicly in one of the world's preeminent educational institutions. And a virtually unknown Marxist humanist from a little island off the coast of the mainland United States has been invited to debate it. It's called Manhattan. There are other examples. A main founder of the market-oriented field of law and economics, Richard Posner, titled his book on the Great Recession, "A Failure of Capitalism." He argues that a capitalist economy is inherently unstable because of the centrality of credit. Similarly, when Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Federal Reserve, testified before the U.S. Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, Bernanke said, quote, "We should not imagine that it is possible to prevent all crises. The provision of credit inevitably involves risk-taking." Now, coming from someone whose job it is to prevent crises, that's a striking admission. So what failed wasn't a particular set of policies or particular financial structure. No, what Bernanke was saying is financial crises are part and parcel of capitalism, and they're inevitable under it. It's not possible to prevent them because it's a credit-driven system. And Bernanke knows what he's talking about. He's not only the chairman of the Fed, he's a highly respected academic economist and a leading expert on the Great Depression. Okay, capitalism is also failing. Yeah. I don't think so. I think it is the reason that we're having the debate. Okay, so I think the real issue is the recession and our failure to come out of it, and this has been turned into a general question, but the reason that we are debating this general question is because of the concrete situation. Again, I don't think we'd be debating this 5 years ago, and so it's this concrete situation that's led to the debate that I want to focus on. Obviously, one can interpret the question in many different ways, but I think that this is the most concrete and immediate way of addressing what I think is the issue that led to the debate tonight. So I think capitalism is also failing now to win people's hearts and minds. The protests in the streets since the crisis erupted have been massive. They're continuing. And even more widespread than that is the total disgust at the great lengths to which policymakers have gone to keep capitalism afloat by bailing out the world's creditors. The discontent hasn't typically had an explicitly anti-capitalist tone, but it's certainly the case that the system is not winning people's hearts and minds either. Governments throughout the world have been brought down or almost brought down by the crisis and disgust and protests. The policymakers did not plan for this to happen. They don't want it to happen, but it's happening. That's a failure. When those in charge of managing the system lose their ability to maintain stability and make us accept our present conditions as inevitable, to the extent that the policymakers today have lost that ability, I call that a serious failure. But is it a failure of capitalism? Well, the failure to control the political situation and win hearts and minds, it isn't confined to countries with a right-of-center government or those with a left-of-center government. It's really about the state of the economy. And the state of the economy is something that policymakers have very little control over. Recent experience has shown us that they've got very little control. Many governments have imposed austerity policies. That hasn't caused their economies to rebound. In contrast, the US government has been wildly stimulative in its policies. Since Lehman Brothers collapsed 4 years ago, US Treasury debt has increased by 2/3. The Treasury's borrowed more than $20,000 per person. Yet economic recovery in the US has also been extremely weak. Okay? Now, what about the bailouts of these creditors? Are they merely failed policies or bad policies that we can blame on specific policymakers? I don't think so. Policymakers have tried mightily to avoid these bailouts. They've tried everything else first. But if the US government hadn't bailed out the creditors after Lehman went under, it's very likely the global financial system would have collapsed and that the economic slump would have been comparable to the Great Depression of the 30s. So I don't think particular policies or particular policymakers are really to blame for these bailouts, or for the failure to win hearts and minds, or for the failure of the politicians to control the political fallout from the economic crisis. So what's left to blame?
Yeah, I started a philosophy course. Speaking of bailouts, isn't it a failure of the markets isn't it a failure of the financial sector, which is just a part of capitalism, which would then mean that it's not the entire capitalism which is failed, but just a part of it, in which case we would just have to adjust the system.
Okay, it's a bailout of creditors in particular. I think that this is a failure, and I want to explain in remarks a bit later why it's a failure, because it brings into, it relates to the issue of too big to fail, which is a very serious problem involving moral hazard and the instability and growing instability of our system. Okay, so I don't think that the policies or policymakers are to blame for the bailouts, the failure to win hearts and minds, the failure to control the political fallout. What's left to blame, as Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid, and it's the capitalist economy. Now, this capitalism is not going to change. As Bernanke and Poser indicate, it's inherently unstable. Policymakers can't prevent all crises, so the bailouts are going to continue. Okay, I have 1 minute. Let me talk about the too big to fail problem. Before early 2008, the creditors of too big to fail institutions were not all sure that they were going to be bailed out when necessary. Now they are sure. That gives them an even greater incentive to engage in excessively risky behavior, so they will. So we're going to get more of the same on an even bigger scale. I would like to talk about the causes of the Great Recession. I wrote a book on this. I don't like capitalism much, but I like marketing. And what I try to say is this is not a crisis of neoliberalism or a crisis of distribution or anything like this, and I trace the causes back to fundamental problems in capitalism that have been going on for 40 years under left of center, right of center governments. It doesn't matter. Low profitability leading to low investment, leading to sluggish growth, leading to rising debt burdens, and it all kind of blew up. These are problems of capitalism itself, which has led to this failure of 5 years going on. Okay, so thank you very much. And before I close, it is the birthday of your president, Austin Maurer, and
Andrew. Thank you all very much. Andrew, I'm not going to say it, but thank you very much. Okay, wow, it's not every day that someone gets, every birthday that someone gets wished happy birthday by this many people. Thank you. To continue with the debate, we have John Longworth, who has been a businessman for over 30 years and is right now Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce. John, if you'd like to begin, would you like to reserve time to rebut?
That 10 minutes was a very long time, so I'll reserve 2 and just speak for 8.
So you have 8 minutes.
Yes, 8 minutes, that's great. Okay, good evening, everybody. It's a great honour to be here, a pleasure and a privilege. As was just said, I'm not an economist, I'm not a professor, I'm not a policy wonk or the head of a think tank, I'm merely a businessman. So you'll have to bear with me, I'm afraid. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here, particularly since there have been so many famous speakers over the 100 and so years of this union. And I just thought I'd share with you that I actually did a similar debate, as was mentioned before, at the Oxford Union a few months ago. Interestingly, I mean, this is, of course, my favourite university. Interestingly, at the Oxford Union, I don't know how you do it here, but they had, rather like Parliament, 2 doors, one for the yeses and one for the nos. Excellent, excellent. And I have to say, I'm relying on the superior intelligence of Cambridge as opposed to the Bullingdon Club. The people who went through the door to the bar obviously voted rather more excessively than those who went through the door to the outside in the rain. I'm assuming that doesn't happen here. The first thing I'd like to do is address the question, which is about capitalism and failure. Because it seems to me that the question is a very precise one. You know, capitalism isn't a moral sentiment or a political dogma. It's not a philosophy or a theology. It's merely a system designed to provide the best allocation of resources for the benefit, which is actually an incidental benefit, of society and progress. The true reason for capitalism, of course, is to provide a return on investment. So, in other words, it's the... Far away.
So talking about capitalism providing benefit for all, and if we look at the bigger picture, we've got about 2 or 3 billion people on this planet. So aside from pooling assets to about the top 1%, who incidentally own about 40% of the world's assets, how in any sense can you say capitalism has not failed?
Okay. I'll come on to that in a moment. So, the best allocation is actually the chessboard. Capitalism is the chessboard, not the players. It's the players who decide on the framework of the rules, the moral judgments, operate intelligence and creativity. It's the players who do this, not actually the system. Capitalism is merely a system. And what about failure? Well, failure suggests that capitalism has disappeared. Capitalism has manifestly not disappeared from the world. In fact, capitalism is becoming more and more popular. It's almost the universal system now in the world for the organization of economics and production. The only systems that still remain in the world are really systems that actually relate to ancient times. Feudalism, thuggery. Those are the systems that still remain. And what I would say is that clearly there are market perturbations. We've already mentioned the recession, but that's just a drop in the ocean. It's just a flick on the dial. We've seen them before. Capitalism has its ups and downs. In the great sweep of economic development in the world, this market perturbation is merely a flick of the switch. There's nothing to it. Capitalism, the market will recover. But that's not about capitalism.
I clearly believe that there is no clear alternative to capitalism. But how can you say it's just the flick of a dial when there's people killing themselves in Greece, when there's people that are starving?
I'll come on to that in a minute. So even Marx, and we have some experts on Marx here today, recognized that the capitalist system is a given. He merely predicted that it would lead people to pursue activities with negative consequences. He didn't provide any alternative to capitalism. Unfortunately, he left that to Lenin and Stalin, which was to all of our disbenefit. By contrast, Adam Smith wrote his treatise on moral sentiments decades before he wrote his Wealth of Nations, recognizing the distinction between human behavior and how people should behave and the actual operation of a capitalist system of economics. I wonder whether Marx actually read Adam Smith. If he had, he'd saved himself an awful lot of time and all of us a great deal of effort. So, to illustrate these thoughts, what I wanted to do was to refer to the counterfactual. The counterfactual being, what if capitalism hadn't developed in England, and what if capitalism had not developed in the rest of the world? So I'll start with the Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt, because it's actually, in that era, is a great illustration of what the world looked like before capitalism began. It was a world of thuggery. It was a world of slaves. Most of the people in this audience, and myself, our ancestors were slaves. Slaves to a feudal few called the aristocracy. That was what it was like before the beginnings of capitalism. The Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt gave people a modicum of market power, which they were able to leverage eventually to become yeomen, to have royal charters, to have guilds of trades, and eventually joint stock companies. And that was the beginning of capitalism, thank God. Because those parts of the world and our country that hadn't developed those things would still be in the era of slavery.
Point of information. So your argument for why capitalism hasn't failed is because it's arbitrarily better than really rubbish systems like slavery.
Yeah, when I conclude, you'll find that I come to that point. Thank you. I'm glad you're all teeing up the argument because it's perfect. So, what did we see as incidental benefits of capitalism? Well, we saw technical development, medicine, science, the progress that we see in the world. The country in which we live today actually has benefited and exists as a consequence of the capitalist economic system.
I'm sorry, I don't exactly know what you mean by capitalism, because capitalism, it seems like it's a catch-all word for anything which is good and green and, it's just nice. But
you haven't given a perfect definition, fair play, but I'm still thinking now, when there was 2008, some people have short memories, but 2008...
Points of order, information?
Okay, the question now is, in 2008, there was a biggest state-subsidized, I would say, welfare benefit to some of the world's biggest banks. Would you say that's capitalism succeeding? Isn't that just capitalists asking the state for welfare?
Thank you for asking the question, because it's very helpful. All of these things are nothing to do with capitalism as a system. They're politics and decisions on the way in which to organize the beginnings, organize the political economy. It is not the capitalist system that's under threat from those things. So I have 1 minute, so I need to actually wrap up. No more. I'm not going to take any more points of order. So what did we see in the world? Well, we saw in the rest of the world, the European princes competed with each other versus the Chinese situation, where 600 years of no progress because there was no competition in the market. We see around the world even today, non-capitalist countries, North Korea, Myanmar, to some extent Russia, which haven't developed the capitalist system in the way that we have in this country, and we see the disbenefit to the organisation and allocation of resources as a consequence. So, apart from the benefit of human progress, and to the question earlier, the lifting out of poverty in the last 20 years of 1 billion people around the world, maybe not a good thing for the trade unions in the UK, but excellent for the developing economy, we've seen the benefits of a capitalist system operating. And to summarise, I would just re-emphasise that we're talking here today about an economic system of the allocation of resources and whether it has failed, not about a political system or a theology. The challenge to you guys in this room is, if you think capitalism has failed, come up with a new system, because nobody has yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You'll have 2 minutes to respond after the next proposition speaker goes. The next proposition speaker is actually a student from Cambridge, a student of engineering, second year at Johns, Leo Impett, who is also the secretary of the Cambridge University Communist Society. The Cambridge University Communist Society. Leo, would you like to reserve 2 minutes, or would you like to take 10?
I would, if that's all right.
Okay,
is
so
the microphone working all right? I've lost my voice a little bit, so you'll have to be a bit patient. Okay. Well, what we've just heard is really astonishing. It's a sort of 1990s liberal capitalist utopian vision, the Fukuyama ideal, that all the different historical processes that led up to this moment have already played themselves out. We've arrived at capitalism. We've settled on it. No one has any interest in changing it, especially not the world's poor, because they don't have a vote anyway, and they certainly don't have an announcement at the start of the meeting. And so we say, all right, well, we've de-ideologized capitalism. We've got it out of politics. As he said, it's now considered to be an economic system, not a political system. We've eliminated any sort of opposition to it. We've made it more ubiquitous than ever. And that's it. We're going to stick with it for the rest of time, for the rest of history. And we don't need to worry about any of its failings as a sort of inherent economic system at all. Nor do we need to worry about the political implications of it. And of course, this isn't quite true. I mean, you talked about... sorry, I realise the microphone keeps going on and off. It's very annoying. I realise you talked about the chessboard and the players. It's quite a gross simplification to do that. I mean, what we don't realise, of course, is that the chessboard and the players, they're not separated like, the wooden chess pieces, but rather the chessboard influences the players and the players influence the chessboard, and the structure of the chessboard influences the game, the players are going to play. So having a wonky chessboard creates wonky players. It's my idea. So what we have to do is take a step back and analyse what we really mean by, failure of capitalism. And I'm glad you brought that question up. If we say, all right, well, Leo Impett failed his first year exam, I didn't, by the way, but if we say Leo Impett fails, it's quite an easy thing to measure. Or we say the policy of appeasement failed, all right, maybe it's a bit more tricky, you can have a bit more debate about it, but it's something with a clear aim. And I think the point you raised about capitalism not having a clear aim, it's not a teleological system. Yeah, please.
Saif Arbet for Tullium. Have you not fundamentally missed the point in the 21st century that capitalism is now culture? It's not just economics, it's not just politics, it is enterprise, it's innovation, it's aspiration. And as such,
No, let him speak.
And as such, it also has insight. So whether you're going to say, has it failed or is it failing, it has the insight to recognize its own failures and to develop from there. And you can compare it to any other system or say we have settled on it, but the fact is it's organic and it is developing. So surely we should unify in moving forward as opposed to sit back and just criticize. Would you not agree?
Okay. So there's 2 points there. The first one I would agree with completely in that it is no longer just an economic system. It's got cultural implications, which I'll go on to talk about. It's got different sorts of aspects to it that are inflicting themselves on our lives in all sorts of different new and unimaginable ways. Now, of course, that's not just a simple question of changing economic system. These cultural things are going to have a lag. We've inherited certain cultural things from feudalism. You only have to look at the Queen to see that capitalism hasn't really taken control over it yet, But no, I do appreciate your point, but I think that to say that because it's infiltrated culture, it's therefore no longer a political question is to miss the point. Because it's infiltrated culture, it's managed to de-ideologize itself. It's managed to extract itself from the political level. But it doesn't make it an inherently less political system. It just means that the debate has moved from one sphere into another. And so, what we're trying to do is move it back, if you like. So, let me go on, because I realise I'm running a bit late. Capitalism has no aims to compare its outcome against. If we say, certain operations failed, we talk about what did it set out to do. And so, you talked about the economic stability of capitalism, and I'm sure we'll hear lots more about how capitalism has brought lots of money and richness and wealth to the people. But really, to consider capitalism based on wealth alone is to admit defeat on half the argument. Because capitalism, if it's being used as an economic system and a political system by humanity, needs to be judged on whatever aspects it is that humanity wants out of it. And we had our initial speaker talking about the fact that the benefits are incidental, you said. They're basically byproducts. Capitalism doesn't have an aim of creating the new world order. If it comes out of it, it's a byproduct, a fortunate byproduct. Now, this is the trouble, because really capitalism does have an aim. And that aim is profit, and that profit is against the interests of humanity. And not just in a narrow economic sense, but in a social, political, economic, everything. So, we have to expand our understanding of capitalism to more than just who wants to be a millionaire. I know it's a cliche, but you look at what Jefferson says about the pursuit of happiness, in the Declaration of Independence. We have more than just money to look at. A society with more overall richness. But yeah, please.
If we have more than simply the economics to look at, might we consider, say, the social implications that I don't remember any gulags in capitalist countries like Britain or America. I don't remember the secret police crashing through the door in the night last week in capitalist countries like Britain or America.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll respond to your question only briefly because I realise I'm running out of time. The first point is that what I'm not doing here is standing up and saying we should replace capitalism immediately with the Soviet Union. This debate is about capitalism. It is not about an alternative to capitalism. It's not about I have all the answers. It's about I've found the problems with the status quo and we need to have a discussion about what the solutions to those might be. The second point about there being no gulags in the capitalist system is, of course, a little bit dodgy because, there was slavery under capitalism, there was imperialism under capitalism, there was all sorts of dodgy businesses conducted in World War I, World War II, all of the 19th century, and continue to be, in Afghanistan and Iraq under capitalism and for capitalist ends. So I think to say, because we live reasonably comfortably, capitalism is not guilty of anything is a simplification. Anyway, I'll move on. What we have is a capitalist dream being projected to us. So, all right, capitalism doesn't have its own objective. It hasn't been designed to meet anything. But we have this capitalist dream being projected onto us, which is the American dream, the fulfillment of the American dream. And what's that about? It's about saying, I want to become rich. Not, I don't want to be poor anymore, but I want to become rich. It's a decoupling of the concept of wealth and poverty. And so we get this level of richness, this American dream, which really adjusts itself historically. I mean, whereas in the 1950s it might have been to have a car, in the 1930s it might have been to have a homeowner, now it might be to jet set abroad, for your holidays, or to go to a private school, whatever. And so it's really a sort of unreachable dream, and it's designed to be an unreachable dream because it's exactly the difference between most people living standards and the dream that they're constantly being told to work towards that creates the work ethic of capitalism. That's what causes the cycles of overproduction. That's what causes the people, just refusing to go out on strike. Yeah, sorry.
Can I question the idea that this rat race is just the result of capitalism? Because you see a lot of examples of this.
Actually, I'll take my 2 minutes now.
What we want to have and what we do have in areas that don't really have a lot to do with money. Like, for example, a lot of people are very unhappy because they don't have a wife or husband, but that doesn't really have a lot to do with being rich.
Yeah, okay, no, I take your point. But whereas it's not just, well, in fact, it links up with my point, is that it's not just about your material wealth, it's about the social and cultural implications of capitalism. I mean, there are plenty of rich people who, under capitalism, are less happy than they would be under an alternative system. It doesn't just affect the poor by removing their right, and their sort of basic standards of living. It affects the rich by attracting them into this sort of frenzy of overproduction. I mean, even the city bankers that are earning millions and millions a year, do you think they lead a happy life? Do you think they feel fulfilled by going and working, 18 hours a day in these offices and producing nothing at the end of it? I don't think so, certainly not. So, okay, so briefly, basically, we get into a cycle of overproduction, but it's not just overproduction in the sense of we all work too much. It's overproduction of the wrong sort of stuff. And that brings on the democratic question. So what are we producing now? I mean, if you take the average of 2000 to 2009, UK defence exports go to about $10 billion a year, 2009 dollars. Instead, if you look at that's UK only, yeah? If you look at the money we spent on cancer research, it's about 15 times less. Now, I ask you, if all of you got together in a big poll and said, what should we spend our money, our collective natural and labour resources on, collectively, we made that decision, would we really come out with an arms expenditure or an arms profit that comes out to be 15 times greater than solving cancer? And solving cancer is a reasonably, first world endeavour. If we look at solving malaria, if we look at solving, water purification, they're even less funded. So it's another question of democracy. Is that, yeah, that's my kill point. All right, well, basically we sum it up like this. I don't want to live in or to contribute towards, even from the inside, Mr. Introducer, a society where, as the gentleman said earlier, half the world, somewhere between quarter and a half, depending on the estimates, lives on complete poverty. Less than $2 a day we're talking about, and that's purchasing power parity. It's a failure, we all know it's a failure, and we can see it's a failure if we look outside, we look at the television, we look at the internet, and it's our duty to do something about it. There was a thing I saw on the television the other day about climate change. And the man, I think it was Dimbleby or someone like that, or maybe Attenborough, he said, what are you going to tell your grandchildren if you say, well, I saw this coming, and I knew about it, and we studied it, and we could see it clearly, and we did nothing. And I think capitalism is the same thing. What are we going to tell our grandchildren if... Oh, are we allowed?
I'm sorry, but we're in the last minute.
I'm afraid we've closed. You can do it later.
If we're after the
next speaker, we'll have points from the floor, and you're welcome to make a point then. Thank you.
Yeah, so that really brings my speech to a close. So thanks. Thank you to everyone. Question. The door that supports the motion is slightly closer to the bar than the door that opposes it. So, you know, just bear that in mind, everyone.
Thank you very much, Leo. Now, I believe John has 2 minutes to rebut Leo's point, and then Madsen Peary will give the next speech for the opposition. But John Longworth, if you'd like to have your 2 minutes.
I hadn't realised I was on so quickly. Well, I better go back to the original proposition, actually, because I can't think of any content in that last presentation that's worth rebutting. There we are. How to win the audience. We've got... I just want to reiterate something so that it remains fresh in your minds. The proposition is that capitalism has failed. No panic. You could turn that on. Could you all hear me in the gallery? They can hear in the other rooms. All right. You turn on the gallery. It's just the button on the side. Can you hear me now? Excellent. Sounds like Dom Jolly, doesn't it? Okay, so let's just remind ourselves of what the proposition is. Capitalism has failed. We're talking about an economic system for the allocation of resources, which is capitalism, and has it failed? So just so it's all fresh in our minds when we the debate, what is the alternative to capitalism? Well, the only alternative that has existed in the world, as far as I can see, is effectively feudalism. Capitalism has been the great liberator for people in a meaningful way. Forget about politics, because that's not capitalism. Forget about theology, because that's not capitalism. Capitalism is simply a system in which these things operate. No, I'm not taking any points in this section. The issue is this. Would people have been liberated in a meaningful way, i.e., could they have actually had fulfillment in lives and economic welfare under a feudal system? Because that is the previous alternative that existed for millennia in the world. That was the previous economic system based on cronyism and thuggery. That is basically what capitalism was an alternative to.
Thank you very much. Next we have, for the opposition, Madsen Peary, who's the president of the Adam Smith Institute. Madsen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations twice. Once on your birthday, and secondly, on finding 3 Marxists and communists to propose this motion. I didn't think I didn't think there were all that many outside of North Korea. So, no. The motion that capitalism has failed is an interesting one because, of course, it was the big alternative, which was not feudalism, it was communism that failed, and most visibly. But let's take a quick peek at what else has failed. Obviously, cronyism has failed. That's government sucking up to their friends in big business and bailing out corporations with vast sums of money. That's clearly failed. Regulation has obviously failed. The financial industries in Britain and America were the most highly regulated of all industries in those countries. And that didn't stop it, did it? So that's regulation has clearly failed. I think you can also say that political manipulation of the economy has failed. Governments underwriting loans to high-risk borrowers, that clearly failed. Flooding the market with cheap money and easy credit, that clearly failed. So governments colluding. Was that me? Governments colluding to create a political currency to promote political union. I think that pretty clearly failed. And of course, the big failure 23 years ago was of the socialist alternative. Now, we are often told, not yet, let me develop my theme. We're often told that, of course, that wasn't socialism. True socialism has never been tried, to which we might reply, well, neither has true capitalism. We're being invited to compare two different things. I produce capitalism in practice versus socialism in theory. Now then, in my book, we compare apples with apples, or pears with pears, but to compare the practice of one with all its warts and imperfections with the theory, the pure theory of how it might be if run by perfect people in a perfect world. No, I'm not accepting that comparison. Mr. President, I would like this fruit marked as People's Exhibit A and inserted into the presidential doggy bag. Yes, it was socialism that was tried. It was real. What was done in the name of Marx was Marxism. They invoked those names correctly. Yes, and it did bring poverty, squalor, and repression. And the 100 million who died really were dead. However, such is our confidence on this side of the House that we are prepared to debate apples versus pears. We will take capitalism in practice with what it actually did, with socialism in theory. And the reason we do that is that even in theory, communism is complete crap. And, let us take a look at one of the most basic assumptions that underlie it, Marx's labor theory of value, that a thing is worth whatever the labor it took to produce it. Now, Marx supposed that any price above that represented exploitation of the workers. Just imagine if that were true, if value were the labor put into it, if it were something we could measure objectively. Why, we'd all agree, wouldn't we? We'd all place the same value on things, and none of us would trade at all. We only trade because we want what the other person has got, more than what we're giving it in exchange. And we both gain in value, and we create wealth by that process. That wouldn't happen if Marx was right. That's why I say communism is crap, even in theory, and I stick to that point. Okay, we exchange in order to create wealth, and without exchange, there would be no wealth creation. Well, big deal. The socialist record in practice was pretty bad. What about the record of capitalism in practice? Oh, sorry, the socialist in theory and practice. But capitalism in practice, however, well, it's actually lifted more people out of subsistence and starvation than anything else humankind has ever done. It has provided wealth, and wealth isn't everything, but that wealth has been used to conquer disease. It's been used to spread sanitation and healthcare, to prolong life. It has funded education. It has funded the arts, literature, music, culture. All of these are the products of the wealth created by capitalism. And not surprisingly, we on this side of the House are in favor of that. Capitalism is the most benign thing that human beings have ever done. Nobody invented capitalism. No one has sat down and said, look, I've got this wonderful system. No. It evolved from the ways in which people deal with each other. It evolves essentially from the human condition. When we forego present consumption in order to generate more later, we are putting a little bit aside for the future. We call wealth capital when we do that. And capitalism is the process of investing part of our current wealth in order to create wealth in the future. Someone said, yes, it's all about profit. Of course it is. Profit is what drives it. Profit is why we do it. Profit means the improvement of the human condition. It means bettering our lives. It means getting more out of our resources. Yes, of course it's profit. It has, as I said, lifted more people out of poverty than ever before. In the last 2 decades, it has lifted over 1 billion people out of starvation and subsistence. That's quite a good record. Now,
in China,
capitalism, I said, is rooted in
China, on the basis of state ownership.
And India. Capitalism is rooted...
On the basis of communist rule.
There's a little phrase...
China's responsible for most of that, as you well know.
I can't remember that phrase, STUFU. I don't know what the letters stand for, but I suggest you do it. Capitalism is... No, I'm finishing now. Capitalism is rooted in human behavior. It will never be perfect because human beings are not perfect. It will face crises because people do. It will evolve and be modified because people learn. I want you tonight to leave this room with the confidence that capitalism will make the world better in the future, as it did in the past. But as you leave, do me a favour, walk through the door on this side of the house, the door that says no over the top, and walk through to say that capitalism has not failed, and it will not fail. So say no to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madsen. Now is your time in the audience to have your voices heard in this debate. There was somebody who had a point that she seems to have left. I'm sorry about that. Before we do take points, I just want a quick reminder. First off, please wait for the microphone to reach you before you begin speaking, and make sure you clearly say your name and college. As I said, even if you can project loudly, I doubt you can project loudly enough that they'll hear you in the bar. It's quite loud in there. So please do make sure you wait for a microphone. The other thing is, again, I just want to reiterate, any perspectives are welcome in the union. We've done a good job so far tonight keeping it polite, not getting too offensive. Madsen. But again, please do respect the views and opinions of others. On that note, there were quite a few points of information that were frustrated, so I would look favorably on those, but are there any points in favor of the motion to speak 1 minute on this House believes capitalism has failed? Just going to give it some time. Okay, back there, I believe you had your hand up first. Is there a microphone?
Yeah.
Here. Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm Oscar and I'm from Downing College. First of all, I find it quite frustrating that people on the opposition have been stating that there has not been a successful attempt at socialism. From 1936 to 39, during what was called the Spanish Revolution, there was an example of anarcho-syndicalism, so non-authoritarian, libertarian communism and socialism, in which worker self-management happened, and under this, production actually increased rather than decreased, efficiency increased, people were happier, they were in control of their lives, free medical things were provided and so forth. So therefore we do have a tangible, living example of this economic system in action, which lasted 3 years, till it was of course crushed by fascism. And so I think we should keep this in mind when discussing whether or not capitalism has failed. It is not the only answer to these problems. There are alternatives, and I suggest you study them. Thank you.
You can't make a point of information like that on somebody's floor speech. You'll have a chance if you raise your hand. Is there a response from the speakers? No? Okay. The speaker's in opposition. It was a point in proposition. Is there a 1 minute speech in opposition of the motion, this House believes that capitalism has failed? Yes, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hi, my name is Millie. I'm from Clare College. I'm a second year and I study economics. I've just made a note on my phone of some things that I'd like to say. Basically, I think it's quite sad that this debate has come down to a dichotomy between communists and somebody from the Adam Smith Institute, because that's not what capitalism is about, and it's actually a very gradual sliding scale, and there are lots of in-between levels that we can look at. The main point I want to make is, what is capitalism? Because there's lots of things that have been thrown around in this room. Capitalism is not about free markets doing whatever they want. It's not about investment bankers making millions of pounds. Capitalism is a flexible system that has evolved over the last 100 or so years that includes many different systems with different levels of government intervention. So capitalism includes the kind of free market beliefs that we had pre-Keynesian. It includes Keynesian beliefs, which were pro-government intervention, and include lots of market intervention in different areas of the government, nationalisation. It includes the Freedman Revolution. It includes everything up until this point, for the last 100 years, that the British and American economies largely have abided by. And that includes lots of different levels of government intervention in in different areas and different things as such. So yes, capitalism isn't trying to say that markets are perfect, because we're fully aware that markets aren't perfect. But markets also aren't run by some God-given force. Markets don't have a mind of their own. They're actually run by human emotions and interactions. So basically what I'm trying to say is capitalism was created by humans, it's run by humans, and it's flexible, and it evolves to the different needs of humans at the time. And for that reason, I don't believe it has failed, and I don't believe it will fail. Thank you.
One minute point in abstention of the motion. Do we have a point in abstention? I'll speak favorably. I'll look favorably on anyone I was rude to before. I think I was pretty rude to you. I'm sorry. If you'd like to go ahead in abstention of the motion.
I like to abstain because we first have to define what is capitalism, and it's not been done here, and I don't think it will be done in the voting. Let's stop the systematic misguidance of our youth, because it's become popular to not know what capitalism is and yet hate it. Capitalism is all about free markets. Keynes and Bernanke are not representatives of free markets. Bailouts and subsidies aren't either. Central credit, certainly, is not a characteristic of free markets. Let us then separate capitalism and free markets from corporativism and interventionism. Understanding that difference and the usual scapegoating that is done to real capitalism, then what argument is there? Usually young people want to believe capitalism does not work, but they don't really do it.
Thank you very much. We'll now take a 1-minute speech in proposition of the motion. This House believes that capitalism has failed. I think I've been quite mean to you by not allowing you to speak all these times, so please go ahead.
Tim Squirrel, Churchill College. I feel the problem with this is that the capitalists have so far moved the goalposts quite a bit. They've sort of adopted this astrologer's point of view of whenever someone criticizes capitalism, they say, you're not doing capitalism right, rather than saying capitalism is flawed. When we live in a world where the ideal of capitalism, the cornerstone of capitalism, the banking system, has to be bailed out by unimaginable amounts of money, when are we going to say that capitalism has failed, if not at this point in time?
Is there a 1-minute speech in opposition of the motion? Wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you. Ingram Davidson, Trinity College. I mean, I'm the resident Spaniard here, so I'm not too keen on being told about my country's history. But 1936 to 1939 was such a shambolic failure that it drove my country to the point of divisions, which led to the most terrible fascist experiment we could possibly had. It led to divisions which led to the murder and genocide almost of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, of disappearing lives. Now, what has actually saved our country has been, okay, since 1975 and the rise of capitalism, democracy and monarchy, we've had relative stability. Now, the fact that I can talk to you in some sort of support of capitalism, when Spain is once again being driven to the point of division, is the very point that I can actually have a say. Without it, Spain was driven to the point where brother was fighting against brother. Since then, the monarchy has stood up for democracy. When there was a military coup, it was the monarchy that stood up for it. When it was democracy that has ensured that there is a federalist option, which every single community is represented. 1936 and 1939 could never be shown as any sort of success, because it led to such an incredible divide. How can you possibly say that? I mean, sorry, I'm very close to kind of going out into Spanish, but en absoluto.
Please don't make this personal.
No, it is personal, because if it weren't for capitalism, then my country would still be driven by such terrible things. We have faced fascism, we have faced socialism, and we very much prefer what we have today. Thank you very much.
Would you like to respond?
No, I want to respond to the first two speakers in the opposition. I'd like to ask them a point of information.
Is your microphone working?
What?
Here.
Oh. I should stand up, right? Yeah, I wanted to ask a point of information because I thought that this debate was about whether capitalism had failed. I'm as anti-Stalinist as anybody. Marxist humanists have a very long track record of very fierce opposition to Stalinism, but that's not the question on the floor. So what I would like to ask the first two speakers in opposition is, aren't you guilty of a massive logical fallacy known as the either-or fallacy or the false dilemma fallacy, where instead of debating whether capitalism has failed, we're being forced to choose between capitalism and Stalinism?
Yeah, I have no idea what you just said, but I agree with you. It is not a question of Stalinism or liberal politics. The whole point about this debate is it's about a system called capitalism. It's not about a political system, it's purely an economic framework in which the world currently operates for the most part. That's why we call it free market capitalism, because as one of the speakers from the floor pointed out, capitalism has many forms. It doesn't have to even be free market. It's an economic system for the allocation of resources based on capital. There have been very few alternatives to this system in the modern age, and most of those systems are simply a continuation of what existed before, which was cronyism and the allocation of resources by powerful individuals. Capitalism has been the greatest liberator of individual freedom and well-being that mankind has ever known. One day, a new system may be invented that is superior and supersedes it, but there is no sign of it yet, and if capitalism had failed, we would see a sign of it. And as I said before, the challenge to all of you is, if there's a better system, then tell us what it is.
Thank you very much. And to close off the floor speeches, is there finally a 1-minute speech in opposition of the motion? Oh, no, abstention. My mistake. Abstention of the motion. Yes, in the back over there.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Girton. I just wanted to re-clarify the point that the proposer and the proposition, the first speaker said, that failure can very successfully be defined on its own terms. So we can talk about apples and apples. We can say, has capitalism on its own terms failed? We don't need to say, has it beaten everything else, or has it... That isn't the nature of the debate, and I just wanted to clarify that as a point in abstention. That I think the main point is being missed, that we can view capitalism on its own objectives and ask whether, in that case, it has failed. And looking at recent events, then perhaps we'll come to a different conclusion than comparing it with the Soviet Union.
Thank you very much. We're actually going to move on because we're getting quite late. So we're going to close off the debate now. For the closing on the proposition side, we have Robert Griffiths, who is the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Britain. Robert, are you...
Thank you, Mr. President. The mass media in Britain are largely owned and controlled by capitalist monopolies or the capitalist state, and they pump out their message that capitalism is the only system and the best system, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I've got 10 minutes to put the opposite case, and so I would rather not take any points of information or intervention. Comrades, if I can call you that. If I can call you that after the vote, the motion before you is clear enough. It doesn't ask you to abolish capitalism next week or next year. It doesn't require you to support any alternative form of society. It doesn't advocate socialism or communism, or, John, it doesn't advocate feudalism either. Nevertheless, you have seen the shoals of anti-red herrings in this debate. They're intended to divert your attention from the sole proposition under consideration. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels recognized how capitalism had revolutionized the face of the earth. But they also warned that modern bourgeois society, which has conjured up such gigantic means of production and exchange, is like the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his spells. Could there be a more apt description of today's economic and financial crisis, the longest and deepest for 80 years? I said crisis, John calls it a perturbation, which is rather polite. And how does today's sorcerer and his well-heeled apprentices look to overcome this crisis? By exploiting labour more intensively, cutting jobs, wages, pensions and public services, and seeking new markets in the former Soviet Union, China, India, the Middle East, doing whatever it takes. But no serious steps will be taken to control the powers of the netherworld. The bankers will mostly escape the consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, the world's banks and financial markets have, so far, received public subsidies and pledges worth close on £20 trillion of public money to bail them out. That's enough to feed the 800 million people on this planet in the capitalist world who suffer malnutrition, including the 6 million children who die every year as a result. That's enough to educate the 114 million children in this capitalist world who have no schools and the 584 million women who are illiterate. And that's enough by providing basic sanitation and safe drinking water for almost half of the world's 7 billion population who don't have it, to eradicate preventable diseases that kill 11 million children and 6 million adults every year. In Britain, the bailout bill so far is £1.3 trillion, about 6 times the total cuts in public spending planned over the next 5 years. The banks have been handed £375 billion in so-called quantitative easing, enough to keep open every closing Remploy factory for disabled workers, or every shut down post office for the next 10,000 years. In reality, capitalism's vast wealth and productive forces are not devoted to solving the most desperate basic problems of billions of our fellow citizens. The giant monopolies that dominate every sector of the capitalist economy, the free market. What a myth. What a loaded term that doesn't correspond to reality in the slightest. The giant monopolies that dominate every sector of the capitalist economy are driven by one overriding goal: to maximize profit. The sorcerer's well-rewarded apprentices will say, that profit is needed to expand investment. So how true is this in, say, the vital pharmaceutical industry? In the British Medical Journal this August, 2 eminent American academics reveal that the world's 7 biggest drugs companies spend around 80% of their budget on sales and marketing, 12 times more than on innovative research. Their profits have grown 6 times more than their spending on research and development since 1990. They mark up the prices of drugs by as much as, and I had to blink when I read this first, 569,000%. They mainly develop their products for their lucrative clients in Western markets. They use the patent system to deny cheap drugs to poorer peoples, and then they lie on a massive scale about their operations. I'll skip over the cesspit that is the armaments industry, with its corrupt deals with tame Arab dictators and its rampant profiteering at public expense, because I want to mention that giant casino, the City of London, and the giant financial corporations which missell insurance and pension schemes, robbing more than 10 million people in Britain of £21 billion, that fiddle the interest rates and make billions as a result, that launder money for dictators and big business throughout the world, and help monopolies and the super rich in Britain stash more than £3 trillion in secret bank accounts and some 28 tax havens under British jurisdiction around the world. Al Capone got 13 years in prison for fiddling his taxes. Why aren't Britain's financial gangsters in the dock? Capitalism's well-paid propagandists plead that their system promotes democracy. There was nothing democratic about slavery and the slave trade, which provided much of the capital, the raw materials and the markets for Britain's industrial revolution. There was nothing democratic, I won't take any points, I'm sorry. There was nothing democratic about empires that imposed oppressive rule and cruel exploitation on subject peoples. There was nothing democratic about the crucial support of Krupp, Tyson, the Deutsche Bank and other German big companies who helped put Hitler into power and then profiteered from his destruction of free trade unionism and the socialist and communist parties and the democratic rights of all German people. Nor was there anything democratic about the installation of dictators and their death squads across large parts of Latin America, Africa and the Middle East for most of the 20th century. Democratic rights have been fought for and won by the people. They've never been willingly granted by their rulers. This is also true, by the way, of progressive taxation, the welfare state, comprehensive education, employment and trade union rights, and the many other measures to combat capitalist privilege and inequality, all of which I think the Adam Smith Institute has opposed. Now we see the monopoly corporations and their paid-for politicians rolling back those social and democratic gains, telling us that we should obey the bond markets, the Bank of England, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, and all those unelected, unaccountable bodies that represent big business interests in our society. Capitalism is failing the people, especially the young people of Britain and Europe today. Capitalism has failed and continues to fail billions of people around the world. Capitalism is failing the planet and its whole ecosystem. Why? Because most of the power and wealth is in the hands of a small minority of the population who take their decisions on the basis of private and corporate self-interest. And I'll finish on this point. The sorcerer's apprentices tell us that nothing else is possible because of human nature, which they say, well, looking in the mirror, I suspect, is predominantly selfish, greedy, and short-sighted. Or as our sponsor put it earlier, greed, selfishness, and ignorance. A bit like capitalism, in fact. Well, really, does that describe you? Can we not build a society based on hard work and human ingenuity? Yes. But also on the principles of coordination, cooperation, solidarity, democracy, and environmental sustainability? If you think we can, then you'll support the motion.
Before we continue, I thank you very much. Before we continue, I just wanted to point out, I know some people may be a little uncomfortable with Mr. Griffiths' choice not to accept points from the floor, but we do have to ask you to please respect our speakers. Some of them come a very long way to speak for only 10 minutes, and we do hope you'll leave it to them to handle those 10 minutes as they see fit. I'd like to thank all the speakers who have taken points from the floor, because it really does add to the debate. However, we do have to respect a speaker's choice if he or she chooses not to. Finally, to close off the debate, for the opposition, we have Linda Yu, who is and I'm sorry for this, she directs the Center for China Growth, she directs the China Growth Center. I'm sorry. Linda, if you'd like to close off the debate. Thanks.
Mr. President, it's really nice to be here. I am normally at Oxford, but it's don't hiss, don't hiss. I'm starting off really well, and I'm really taken by the level of information that's actually been brought out tonight. And so I'm not a natural debater. If you do have questions you'd like to ask, if it will help you decide whether to vote for our side, I'd be happy to take them. So just to let you know, the floor will be open. I actually just wanted to start off just by saying that when I was asked which side of the motion that I wanted to be on tonight, I did actually have to think about it. And a lot of the points made by the proposers have to do with disillusionment from the Great Recession. Why is it's taken so long? How is it that crony capitalism got so out of hand in systems which are supposed to have very good rules of law to set the parameters on the markets? And I feel a similar sense of disappointment. And capitalism is flawed. But I suppose the reason I ended up on this side was because I'm an empirical economist, and a lot of my work, as the president has, it is the China Growth Center, is actually on Chinese growth and development economics. And I've actually seen for myself what it is a market-based system is. And in fact, I'm going to be very specific. It is actually a market-oriented system rather than anything much more grandiose. I'm an economist. We're simple people. We have lots of definitions that don't always work in practice. But I have always thought about this process as allowing incentives to work so that people are rewarded for what it is that they produce. And ultimately, a lot of the work that I've written on China, I describe the system as market-oriented. I don't think I've ever actually described it as capitalist, because I see the spectrum, a point that was made before, in terms of how these systems actually work. So I want to come back to some of the points made by the proposition on this idea of disillusionment and flaws and reinvention. But I want to just focus for a moment on why it is studying China has changed my mind. Now, the very first thing I should say is that there's many kinds of economists. They are the kind who say that if this is my economic model, this is my economic theory, look how beautiful the maths is. I'm not naming any tutors at Cambridge right now. Look, the solution is beautiful. And if the facts don't fit it, well, obviously, the facts are wrong. That isn't, you're supposed to applaud then, by the way. The facts are not wrong. Thank you. And in fact, I'm the kind that tries to look at the facts. Now, one of the things that economists are trying to do is to just look at natural experiments. So let's take China, to me, a country I know very well. And the experiment is very simple. For 30 years, between 1949 and 1979, it had a centrally planned economy. From 1979 to the present, it has a market-oriented economy. And the difference between the first 30 years and the second 30 years, to me, is more than obvious. In the very first 30 years, not to say there wasn't progress, because there was progress of sorts. But by the end of that 30 years, standards of living were worse in China than in the first period started. And I'm not just talking about periods of upheaval. I'm talking about very basic things like what is your grain allocation? What is your standard of living? How much space do you actually get to live in? Are you actually rewarded based on what you produce? And the answer there is no. But in the 30 years since 1979, because they did adopt the system based on incentives, more market-driven, I mean, the improvement is substantial for the average Chinese. I'm not talking about those who can go out into Harrods and buy Harrods. I'm talking they buy much more expensive stuff on Bond Street. I'm not talking about that echelon. I'm talking about the 660 million people who no longer live in poverty. And this is not a number which I think it's hard to get your head around actually how big this number actually is. That's 10 times the population of Britain. And their standards of living have improved. And more importantly, these are the kinds of things that I have seen during this time, is that the average Chinese can now choose where they want to live. They can choose the flat. They can afford it, which is why, again, capitalism is flawed. They can choose where they want to live. They don't have a work unit allocating their housing for them. And they can actually also choose, for instance, farmers can choose to till their land. They can choose now to increasingly, not entirely, lease their land. They can choose how to allocate their own efforts. And I think that kind of freedom of choice is a system that has driven greater productivity. It's the reason why you see this massive poverty reduction that I've mentioned. Yeah, of course, I welcome questions. I would say mostly economic system, because the thing about the Chinese leadership is that we're about to have a fifth generation of leaders, but not a great deal actually changed between, say, when who and when took over. And the reason for it is because the 5-year plans, they're on the 12th one, are actually fashioned before the leadership change. So the current 5-year plan was done in implemented in 2011, is designed so that the leadership change doesn't actually affect the underlying economics. Of course, Deng Xiaoping was the instigator. He was the one who decided that China practically had to do something very different. And I think that leadership change did matter. That was the break between the first 30 to the second 30 years. So to me, a lot of the growth and development stories, by the way, is not limited just to China. In the early 1990s, the turning outward of a great deal of developing countries transformed the global economy. They're the reason why countries like India, countries in Latin America, countries like Africa are now doing much better than before and having a voice on the global stage. For instance, in the early 1990s, yes. Okay. Yeah, it's a good point. I think sometimes when you discuss issues like, there's a point raised here about definition earlier, why somebody was abstaining. To me, the reason I made that introduction about saying that it's market-oriented is because I don't think there is actually one definition of capitalism. And to say that the Chinese are not practicing a system, a market-oriented change, which on the spectrum is closer to capitalism than it is to central planning, is simply not the case. And it's the same thing for India and the African so this is not about. Can I finish this answer and then I'll take you. So I think definitionally this is an important point. So what you're really talking about is it a system which rewards incentives and allows for productivity to be rewarded? To me, that is the crucial difference. There's a range of definitions on capitalism, and as I said, it's closer in the spectrum to capitalism. And and as I said, it's a spectrum. I don't think we possibly, I didn't have time to say Africa wasn't a country. I'm not going to have time to define the entire spectrum. But like I said, I've always emphasized we want a definition of what this is. It is a market-based system, which is what it is in America, which is what it is in the West. Okay, sorry, you had a question.
If you're advocating a market-orientated system, then you're not advocating the success of a purely capitalist system. So are you on the right side?
It's again definitional. I don't think there's actually anything like a pure anything, because I think most things are actually in the middle, which actually brings me to the points which were raised by the proposer, which is, I think some of the disillusionment with the system is completely understandable. I can completely I see that, especially in terms of youth unemployment. I think this is one of the crucial issues that many are confronting, including in developed countries. But I think the issue here is, if you have a system, to presuppose a system is perfect is something which a pure system just doesn't exist in reality. And I say this because I'm also a lawyer by training, and lawyers laugh at economists who say, well, look at this. This is the model. This is the system, and we need to replace it with a whole other system. And that isn't actually how I view how the evolution of these systems are. If you have a market-oriented system, it's a system that will have flaws and it will fail. And in fact, one of the things that surprised me was how is it managed to last from the failures of the 1930s to now. To me, that's actually pretty extraordinary, because the situation in the 1930s was even a bigger indictment, a lot of the market system that we're discussing today. Yes? Yeah?
How do you feel, like in this remaining time that you have, how do you feel? Do you feel that capitalism is actually fit for the particular historical niche of nowadays, when we have the environmental protection problem dominant, and does it actually fit into the whole economic system of China in particular?
I see the environmental constraints as a real concern for lots of reasons, because, as I said, it's a system which I think of as being flawed in many, many ways. And, it's... do I see that as an indictment that capitalism has entirely failed? I don't, because I see it as a flaw amongst the many that we've seen. And I suppose, let me just end with this, because I know I'm actually pretty much out of time, which is, if a system, any system, fails, it will disappear. And I think that's what we've seen in history. And to paraphrase Churchill, it's, okay, if I get this wrong, I don't want anyone to come back on this, which is, I think you said this of democracy, is capitalism is the worst possible system except for all the others. So if you want to vote with us, please do. The door is that way, I think. And thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much, Linda. And thank you, everyone, for enjoying and participating in tonight's debate. It's just about done. We're just about to the exciting part, the voting and going to the bar. Before we do go to the bar, I just want to say a couple of quick few things I didn't get to say when we were changing over tapes. One is actually the office is open tonight if you'd like to join before midnight, before the price hike. The other is, if you're interested in giving your feedback to the society, letting us know what we can do differently. As I said, the committee runs the society. We are students just like yourselves, and we need all the input we could get. Tomorrow evening, there's a college representatives meeting. It's a name for the meeting, but frankly, you're all welcome to attend in the bar. Check the term card online or in the paper copy for what time that is. I believe it's 5:15, but all are welcome to come and give feedback then. And again, the office is open tonight. Hopefully we will see you around this coming week and in future weeks. As with every debate this term, we vote with our feet. The door through which you leave is significant. On the right is ayes, those that agree with the motion. This House believes that capitalism has failed. On the left is noes. Right down the middle, we have abstentions, though we encourage you to pin your colors to the wall. And we will announce the results in the bar once everyone is out of the chamber. So I look forward to seeing you there, and we're happy to answer any questions.